Welcome back to Is Life After Death Impossible? And now, part 2.
Arthur's argument rests on his claim that every aspect of consciousness is tied to brain functioning. I can debunk his claim with a simple syllogism. 3 premises followed by an ineluctable conclusion. Premise number 1. The idea that we have a separate self is actually an illusion, created by the brain. Premise number 2. It is possible to actually experience this fact, not just believe it. Premise number 3. The brain cannot create this experience, as there is no function or capacity in the brain to do so. Conclusion. Since there is an aspect of consciousness that cannot be created by the brain, it follows that at least some part of consciousness transcends brain functioning. And since consciousness transcends, and is not limited by, brain functioning, life after death is possible. So, taking these one by one. First premise. The concept of the self is an illusion created by the brain. For many, this might seem odd, or even crazy. Most of us feel that there is some kind of an I, riding around in our heads, a thinker of thoughts in addition to the thoughts. However, mystics of all religions have said through the ages that this sense of a separate self is merely an illusion. And now, in recent years, cognitive neuroscience has caught up with this idea, and has verified it. The separate self is an illusion. There is no doubt about it. From a neuroscience perspective, there is no place in the brain for a self. There is no single part of my brain that I can point to, and say that this is where the me is. Rather, what neuroscience shows is that the brain is madly conducting all kinds of different, and separate, operations. It is engaged in perceptions, thoughts, memories, emotions. All of these are the result of brain processes, and all of them are separate from each other, functioning in different parts of the brain, like construction workers who are each doing different tasks at the same time. One hammering nails into the frame, another simultaneously carrying shingles, and so on. Somehow all of these brain processes come together to create the sense that there is an I at the center of it all. But if you look closely enough, it becomes evident that, similar to what Dorothy Parker famously said of Oakland, there is no there. This is not even controversial neuroscience. It is entirely accepted. So premise number 1, that the separate self is an illusion, is established. Let's move on to premise number 2. Premise number 2 holds that it is possible to actually experience this fact, not just believe it. There are numerous ways to experience this awareness. Meditation, yoga, fasting, and various psychedelic drugs are just a few of the ways. But no matter which route you take to arrive at the experience, once you have it, you know that it is true. You know, beyond any doubt, that the separate self is indeed an illusion. And thus, premise number 2 is established. Which brings us to premise number 3. There is no function or capacity in the brain that can create this awareness. The brain can do many things. For instance, it can pick up vibrations from the outside world and translate them into what we know as hearing. It can manufacture a sense of touch out of the fact that the electrons in my fingers are repelling the electrons in the keys on my computer keyboard. Actually, the brain manufactures all of our senses. Neuroscience has established conclusively that the brain does not give us a true representation of the world around us. Rather, it receives signals from the outside world, and creates from them a simulation, one that we can use as a proxy for the real world. The brain thus does an amazing thing, in that it basically creates a virtual world. And it does more than this as well. The brain, a master at multitasking, creates, and modulates emotions, and thoughts, and flights of imagination. And not only all this, but the brain also takes all the different things that it does, and all the things that it creates, and stitches it all into a narrative about ourselves and the outside world, a narrative that is as compelling as it is false. The narrative is that I am in here, and the world is out there, and I am experiencing the world as a singular phenomenon. And I am experiencing the world as it truly is. None of which is actually true. Yes, the brain can do many incredible things. But do you know what the brain cannot do? The brain cannot directly apprehend things as they truly are. And the brain cannot step outside itself and pull back the curtain that envelops it, and show that the perceptions it creates are illusions. The brain cannot do these things because there is no mechanism inside the brain for them. There is no mechanism inside the brain that would allow it to step outside itself and say, "Holy cow. That is so bizarre. All that I do is crunch data and manufacture illusions." After all, think about it, machines can only do what their design and circuitry allows them to do. For example, your television cannot walk out your front door and cut your grass, because it does not have the design and circuitry to do so. Your brain is a machine, and it too can only do what its design and circuitry allow it to do. And your brain does not have the design and circuitry to step beyond itself, and produce an awareness that it is making all these illusions. It can no more create this awareness than a camera can focus its lens on itself, or imagine someone who lives his entire life in a cave. And then one day, while still in the cave, has a conscious experience of what the universe is like outside. Yeah, no, that doesn't, and can't, happen. And thus is established premise number 3, that is, there is no function or capacity in the brain that can allow us to experience awareness that the self is an illusion. Which brings us to the inescapable conclusion. Since there is an aspect of conscious experience that cannot be created by the brain, this means that at least some part of consciousness transcends brain functioning. Therefore, consciousness does not necessarily end when the brain stops functioning, and thus, life after death is not impossible.
Fascinating stuff. Janet and Arthur, I think that you both have expressed your positions quite clearly. Arthur says that life after death is impossible, because consciousness relies entirely on the functioning of the brain. Janet says not so fast. She holds that there are some elements of consciousness that the brain is not capable of producing, and thus, life after death is actually not impossible. We'll leave it up to the viewers to decide who had the stronger argument. And that does it for today's edition of What is True? We'd love it if you became a subscriber. More editions are coming. In the meantime, keep an open mind and an open heart, and follow the evidence where it leads you.